Late one afternoon in Costa Rica, a farmer discovered a large crocodile near the watering hole used by his cattle. Fearing for the safety of his livestock, the farmer shot the crocodile through the left eye, leaving the crocodile to die of his wounds. Swimming away from the site of his shooting, the exhausted and mortally wounded crocodile clambered ashore and lay on the cold mud preparing to die. Then suddenly a local man named Cheeto stumbled across the dying beast. Wary at first, Cheeto saw that this crocodile was in bad shape. It hardly reacted to his presence and was a very skinny 150 pounds. Without hesitation, Cheeto contacted several of his friends and convinced them to help him load the injured animal into a boat to transport it to Cheeto's home several miles away. For 6 months, Cheeto hand-fed the injured crocodile, now named Pocho, chicken, fish, and even medicine to help bring back the large beast from the brink of death. To encourage the 5-meter-long crocodile to eat, Cheeto even took bites of the same food he was feeding Pocho and pretended to chew it, and then fed it to Pocho by hand. Cheeto was feeding Pocho and tending to his wounds, but deep down he felt that this wasn't enough, that Pocho needed more. As the weeks passed, Cheeto began to make physical contact with the giant crocodile, at first petting him, but then eventually giving the croc kisses and even hugging it. Pocho reacted to the affection, quickly making a full recovery from a wound that should have been fatal. As Cheeto would go on to say, food wasn't enough. The crocodile needed my love to regain the will to live. For months, Cheeto kept Pocho a secret from local authorities and hid his presence by caring for the crocodile in a remote pond, hidden deep in the Costa Rican jungle. Eventually, though, the authorities discovered the strange relationship, but rather than try to separate the two, they issued Cheeto special permits to keep caring for the croc and allowed him to do so on the condition that an official veterinarian monitor Pocho's health. Also, Pocho would have to eventually be released back to the wild, something Cheeto agreed to despite his growing affection and deep bond with the crocodile. Cheeto dedicated the bulk of his life to Pocho's recovery, even going so far as to sneak out at night and go to the pond that was Pocho's home. There he would swim with the giant croc in the pitch dark, cuddling with the animal and napping alongside his prehistoric companion. When he snuck back home early in the morning, he would explain to his wife that he'd been drinking with friends and fallen into the water. As Cheeto's nighttime excursions mounted though, his wife became deeply suspicious of just how many times he seemed to accidentally fall into random ponds or the river. At last, she had enough and divorced Cheeto, claiming that he spent more time with the crocodile than with his family. She wasn't wrong either, as by now Cheeto spent nearly every waking moment with Pocho and sometimes slept with the animal until late in the morning. Cheeto would later say of his divorce, "Another wife I could get. Pocho was one in a million." Cheeto was probably right, as there's never been any recorded accounts of humans living with a crocodile as intimately as Pocho and Cheeto's relationship. The two were a fully bonded pair by now, and despite having the power to easily devour Cheeto and rend him limb from limb, Pocho displayed an incredible tenderness with Cheeto and even allowed Cheeto to lay on him and ride him through the water. Yet to observers, it was obvious that Pocho wasn't just putting up with Cheeto's antics, and he was actively enjoying them. Eventually, however, the day came for Pocho to return to the wild, and with a reluctant heart, Cheeto led Pocho to a local river and shooed the massive beast away. Broken-hearted, Cheeto turned his back on Pocho and the magical relationship the two had formed, knowing that in the end Pocho would be happier in the wild than in the small pond he'd been living in since his injury. Yet the next morning as Cheeto awoke, he was shocked to discover Pocho asleep outside his doorstep. The big croc had somehow managed to track Cheeto for miles through the jungle, all the way back to his home. More than that, it was obvious that Pocho had made a decision. He wanted to be near Cheeto, not alone living in the wild. The bond between the two was firmly cemented, and from that day, the duo was completely inseparable, with Pocho taking up residence in the water right outside Cheeto's home. In July of 2000, word of Pocho and Cheeto's relationship spread across Costa Rica, and Costa Rica's Channel 7 aired a special showcasing the unusual pair. The duo became instant stars, and visitors and scientists from around the world traveled to observe and study their relationship. The two even put on their own act every Sunday afternoon in an artificial lake at Finca Las Tilapias, drawing packed crowds who couldn't believe a man could not just swim with a crocodile, but cuddle it, ride it, and even hand-feed it without being devoured. Scientists took the opportunity to study this incredible relationship, and Pocho and Cheeto made modern biologists rethink their assumptions on the behavior and characteristics of an animal that was seen for millennia as nothing more than a cold-blooded killer. Reptiles have long been thought to not be particularly nurturing or caring animals, and certainly nobody ever thought that a reptile was capable of developing as deep a bond and relationship with a member of another species as, say, a dog or cat was capable of. Our own mammalian bias has for a long time cast reptiles off as uncaring, as emotionally distant and cold as their blood. But Pocho was living proof that crocodiles could not just form deep emotional bonds with people, but actually choose that bond over their own freedom. All the while, Pocho and Cheeto's relationship blossomed. Cheeto knew that crocodiles are capable of living for an extremely long time, sometimes upwards of a century or more. Cheeto, on the other hand, was already in his 50s, and in all likelihood, Pocho would outlive him. In this case, Cheeto did not want Pocho to live alone, and though he didn't doubt Pocho's ability to live in the wild, the thought of his best friend living a lonely life was enough to break his heart. Therefore, Cheeto began to train his young daughter on how to handle Pocho, gradually acclimating her and Pocho to each other, and preparing her to eventually be Pocho's caretaker after Cheeto's death, something she looked forward to eagerly. Then, tragedy struck. One morning, Cheeto woke up and strolled outside to greet his best friend, but Pocho was nowhere to be seen. Cheeto checked the water around his home, but couldn't find him there either. Walking to the river where the two frequently played in, he spotted Pocho's large figure hidden deep in the bushes. Rushing to his best friend, Cheeto was dismayed to discover Pocho dead of natural causes. A relatively young crocodile, Pocho should have lived for decades more, yet ultimately it's thought that he likely succumbed to the injuries he suffered nearly 20 years ago. Whatever the cause, Pocho seemed to have known that his death was close, and maybe it was an instinct, but maybe it was the desire to not have his best friend have his heart broken that led Pocho to try and hide in his final moments. Given the extraordinary relationship between the two, science now has to consider the possibility that this 5-meter-long crocodile did just that in order to spare his human friend the pain of finding him dead. Will you ever look at crocodiles the same way again? Are all animals capable of these deep emotional bonds, or was Pocho somehow unique? If you found this video interesting, make sure you check out our other video. Somebody is watching you right now. As always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.